Hello, I'm Mike Beam, and I have the honor and the pleasure to serve as your Kansas Secretary of Agriculture. With me here today is Kelsey Olson, who is the Deputy Secretary here at the Kansas Department of Agriculture. The Department of Ag has traditionally hosted the Ag Growth Summit in Manhattan this time of year, sometimes late in August for the last 5 years. But of course, this year, in the interest of public health, we went to virtual online versions with webinars. And this is the final week of what's been a very fruitful and involved sessions that have involved 17 sectors of agriculture with 17 separate webinars. In these challenging times, I think we realize that the role agricultural plays in Kansas as the largest industry and economic driver is probably more critical than ever. And so we continue to be focused on economic growth for the state, which we know is dependent on growth in our ag sectors. Strategic industry growth requires communication, coordination, and collaboration, which is why we're here. We're going to focus on that collaborative spirit as we look at several of the major statewide initiatives that are being spearheaded by other state agencies here in Kansas. We know that ag is an integral part of the health and vitality of communities across the state. And today we'll be discussing several programs that are part of the efforts to sustain and grow these communities. Just a few things in regards to our session. We'll have 3 speakers with providing these 3 statewide initiatives, but there'll be a chance to ask questions for each speaker. So if you have a question, we would encourage you to utilize what they call the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can type those in, and we would ask that you might include your name, your city or county, and if you're affiliated with an organization, you can include that as well. So our first presenter, we're honored to have Lieutenant Governor Lynn Rogers, who was sworn in as Lieutenant Governor back on January 14, 2019. He is a former state senator and also served as Wichita Board of Education president. But most importantly, Lieutenant Governor Rogers knows agriculture. He spent over 30 years traveling Kansas as an ag banker, assisting farmers and ranchers with financial planning and investment. He worked to provide more than $700 million in leasing and financing service to farmers, ranchers, and grain cooperatives. This experience helped him understand the challenges Kansas faces in rural America. As Lieutenant Governor, Lynn heads up the newly created Office of Rural Prosperity. He will focus on expanding opportunities in rural communities by working with farmers, ranchers, business owners, health professionals, community leaders, and many others. We're excited to have you, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you so much for joining us. Hello, good morning, Kansas agriculture. It was fun to see so many familiar names on those that are calling in and attending. Some of you I've worked with in the Farm Credit System for 30 some years, others just in the last year or two while I've been here in the State Senate. Before I start discussing the Office of Rural Prosperity, I want to thank all of you for what you do to help feed our country, to keep our country running, and to help us get through to the stronger side after this pandemic. Your communities could not do it without you, and our country could not do without you as well. Many of you know the favorite part of my job has been to travel in rural Kansas, and that's been difficult the last few years of the pandemic, or months of the pandemic. But even after our long summer tour last year, my wife and I actually vacationed in rural Kansas, down in southeast Kansas. So we really love to be in rural Kansas as much as we can. When we visited the communities in, really since the pandemic, we've had some smaller events and smaller meetings. Last week, I was in Manhattan to visit the flour mill at K-State and the cheese factory in Alma. So we're going to continue to visit and travel and visit with rural Kansas. So whether you're a business owner, a community leader, public health official or a parent at home, I just really cannot say how proud I am of how all of you have worked so well together and have done so much to get us through this difficult period of time. As you know, last year for our summer tour, we traveled about 4,700 miles, visited 12 different cities, and held about 130 meetings, and visited a lot of other communities besides our 12 meeting spaces. And we discussed what was important to rural Kansas. Those discussions really helped focus and establish the foundation for the Office of Rural Prosperity and what our priorities are for going forward. Just as they continue to inform us, the voices, the thoughts, and the concerns of rural Kansas during the 2019 listening tour were instrumental for building that blueprint and our priorities. But not surprisingly, what we heard was broadband, housing, childcare and early childhood education, healthcare, and infrastructure as some of the big issues that rose to the top in nearly every part of the state. Having gone out and listened to the rural Kansas, we planned on how we would work effectively going forward. Our first step was to expand capacity for ORP, and that was so that we'd have an ongoing focus of our direct conversations with Kansas and their needs. Next, we put together the feedback to advocate for action at the state level. In order to do that, we recruited Jillian Fisher as our ORP outreach manager and Joshua McGinn as our policy coordinator. And their job is to help us identify and work with the legislature, key committees and key departments and agencies on these different priorities. We also supported the expansion and the restoration of the Community Development Division within the Department of Commerce. That division was reestablished so that we could align our resources in the right way for each rural community, whether it's ag-related or rural-related. Enhanced technical assistance provided to those communities. Wanted to make sure that the block grant process, CDBG, continued, and the tax credit program. And also, and we'll hear more about these issues from the Department of Commerce, but we saw the return of Main Street. We have 25 Main Street communities, and they're close to opening up the application for additional. In addition to these things that we're doing ourselves in ORP, we also asked, and the governor has worked with each of our state agencies to bring back and look at things that we can streamline or change or enhance that will be prioritizing rural Kansas. What is it that we need to look at differently from a rural perspective? And as part of that, you know, we're putting together work groups for through KHRC, the Kansas Housing Resource Center, and the Children's Cabinet for Childcare. And we're working with work groups there, again, to make sure the rural voice is raised and brought to the table here in Topeka. Policy issues around broadband, rural health care, especially Medicaid expansion, and improved infrastructure are issues that we have talked about, and I talk with the governor on a regular basis. One of the key points of our agency or our group is broadband, and expanding and enhancing that as much as we can, because we heard all over the state the places where we have gaps. That high-speed need is something that we've been talking about for quite a while, but we really saw it even more so during the pandemic as everybody was working from home and doing school from home and doing church from home. We just saw how important having good access. So we're glad to be able to work on the policy recommendations that came from the broadband task force that came before us, but that we added as part of the IKE program that Lindsey will talk about, that we added that process for broadband in the 10-year transportation plan. Because we really see broadband as a key part of our infrastructure. And it's also something that we need to put long-term attention to. The first 3 years, it's $5 million for grants, and then after that, it's $10 million. We really realize that broadband is not a luxury. It's a commodity that we need to have in our communities, and it's something that we cannot take for granted. We need it for telemedicine. We need it for long-distance learning. We need it for a lot of different things. Also, the CARES or SPARK task force, our administration saw the need for additional funding that can be used from the money that came from Congress. and the State Finance Council approved our plan last week for an additional $60 million, and they'll be putting that into effect. That's something that we'll hopefully put together and put into effect just right away. There are some small differences between the CARES Act, the Spark Plan, and the IKE, but basically public, private, and nonprofit entities can apply. As long as you can demonstrate that you have capacity and that you need capacity, you can do it. Both programs are technology neutral. Many of you know what works in one area will not work in another, so we want to make sure that it fits for each area. And projects need to demonstrate measurable economic and quality of life improvements and benefits to both residents and businesses. And projects need to meet a minimum speed that will provide adequate upload and download speeds for the communities that they're serving. We know there are pockets and there are areas where we don't have enough broadband and Wi-Fi, and so we're hoping that these grants will help us do that. We're thrilled that we've got this additional $60 million from the CARES Act. Once we develop that, we'll know that the state grant program will help us leverage other areas where we're missing capacity. And just as the Great Depression highlighted the need for rural electrification and how the greatest generation rose to that challenge, we must rise to the challenge that COVID has presented, and we think that affordable broadband is one of our key areas. We're also working for workforce. We're working with a number of areas to help. Last week we talked with a group talking about rural and remote, how people can enhance their job skills and be available to do their job in rural Kansas on the internet. We know that funding will help train more people, encourage more employers to use people in rural Kansas to enhance our communities. The Kansas Works program has already had 3 virtual job fairs, and they'll continue to adapt their program for that as well. And then finally, we've partnered with Marcy Penner and the Kansas Sampler Foundation to connect with young professionals in rural areas to see what's working, what isn't, and what can be done to keep, retain, recruit, and empower our youngest and our best and our brightest. We heard often last summer about the brain drain, and we need our rural young people to understand that many of the jobs that they go to college for, they can come back home and have those same jobs in their own communities. One last thing I'd like to point out that's very, very vital to rural Kansas, and that is taking the census. I know many of you have been hearing about the 2020 census for quite some time, but I'd encourage you to go to the website and check it out, because we have a number of counties that are way below where they need to be. We have a statewide average of about 67% participation. We have some counties as low as 40%. If we don't get people turned out for the census, we will lose a lot of funding for many of these key areas over the next decade. But even more importantly, the legislative districts that are currently representing you will get much bigger. And so that means you'll have, yes, the same number of people will be represented in a Senate or a House district, but it'll be that senator or House member may be located a lot farther from you than they currently are. So please, if you have not filled out the 2020 census, I ask that you do that, and please share that with your friends and your family and your neighbors to get that done as well. So again, in closing, I just want to thank you all for everything that you do for our state. We know that COVID has impacted everything that we do, including our ORP work, but like you, we've made adjustments. We're going to keep moving course correction, but all of our priorities continue to remain important aspects of our work, of the state's work, and our ability to work together with our local communities. So thank you. Hopefully next year we can all meet in person.
All right. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor. We'll go ahead and take some questions now if anyone has any for the Lieutenant Governor. We did have one that's come in, and the question was, are there any legislative policies that are being developed now that are specifically geared towards rural Kansas that we might pay attention to this next session?
We have not come up with any of our own yet at this point, because we're in the second process of our tour. We're doing our 2020 tour right now. We did North Central and Northwest Kansas This coming Saturday, we're going to do a statewide, and then we have each of the other 4 regions between now and the middle of September. So that will be part of what our process is. We'll also, after the elections, be meeting with many of the new legislators. We'll also be talking with the House's Rural Revitalization Committee to report to them what we've heard this time. So at this point, there's not any particular legislation yet that has been determined. We would take any ideas or thoughts that you might have.
All right, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any additional questions coming in at this moment, but doesn't mean that there's still not an opportunity. If you think of something, please feel free to type those into the chats at this point. And we will get those questions over to the Lieutenant Governor as they come in. We'll go ahead and move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Lindsey Douglas. She is the Deputy Secretary of the Kansas Department of Transportation. Lindsey has worked for 13 years in both the public and private sectors of Kansas legislature, and prior to this, and had the chance of working on the package of the T-Works program through KDOT, and has served as the Senior Director of the Public Affairs for the Union Pacific Railroad in Kansas, Missouri, and Arizona. She is a graduate of the Vermont Law School and earned a master's in studies of a degree of environmental law and a Washburn University earning Bachelor of Public Administration degree. In her role as the Deputy Secretary, Douglas manages the divisions of aviation, policy, and fiscal asset management. With that, we welcome Lindsey, and I'm excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you very much, Kelsey and Secretary Beam. I really appreciate KDOT being included in the webinars this year. The summit is something that I personally look forward to every year. I enjoy getting to hear from rural Kansas and some of the challenges that they are experiencing in the ag economy. And that is something I think for this next transportation program that we've really made an effort to try and get a broad swath of impact as it relates to the transportation program. So as Kelsey mentioned, we have a new 10-year transportation program called the Eisenhower Legacy Program. We have launched that just after this session. And you know, the name for Eisenhower Legacy is so perfect because our prize son, President Eisenhower, really developed the interstate system under his presidency. And a lot of that was developed due to the challenges that he faced at war. So logistics were a huge issue, both supply chain and for our troops. And so while Eisenhower was General Eisenhower, he actually created this red ball system that prioritized roads for freight movement. And so if a route was identified as a red ball route, it was a priority for supplies during that time. Also, he knew under the civil defense strategy that we would have to have a way of getting our folks out of communities and get evacuations done quickly. So that was another reason for the interstate system. And then, you know, Fort Riley, which is really an amazing asset for the state of Kansas. Fort Riley is uniquely positioned with their highway access, but also their rail capabilities in the state. And you can deploy anywhere in the world from Fort Riley. So that is a unique asset that we have and was really founded by President Eisenhower. So his approach to transportation and infrastructure was based both on General Eisenhower and as president. And when we look at transportation in the state of Kansas, transportation is about roads and bridges, but also so much more. Transportation is about moving people, moving freight, moving our healthcare system. You heard Lieutenant Governor Rogers talk about the need for broadband infrastructure around the state. That is moving information. When you think about telemedicine or other resources, especially now in the environment that we are challenged with, education resources are deployed using broadband as well. So it's a very important piece of infrastructure. To form the IKE Transportation Program, we met with over 2,000 Kansans in 2 rounds of what we call local consultation meetings. The goals that came out of those conversations are safer roads, economic growth, and more options for Kansas communities. And we want to deliver on those goals with a strong foundation of transparency and accountability. We want everyone to understand how these investments are prioritized to meet these goals. And the guiding principles to achieve the goals is being flexible and responsive. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how that flexibility is built into the program, how we at KDOT want to help communities problem solve, and how we want to leverage partnerships with communities to deliver more transportation, more infrastructure resources to the entire state. And again, that transparency and accountability is huge as we look to do that. So infrastructure and transportation really are assisting in problem solving everywhere from healthcare to education, jobs, technology. Our major markets in the state of Kansas all rely on a good transportation system that's reliable. And we want to continue working together with Kansans on their needs and meeting those needs in every area of the state, whether that be urban or rural. And we have to focus on our preservation of the system that we have now. We know that there are key locations where we need expansion or additional capacity, but we know that preservation is a huge piece of making sure that we have a reliable system overall. So about that flexibility that I mentioned before, what we have built in here is instead of having, as TWorks was created, you had projects selected early on in the TWorks program, and then they continued to be delivered over the 10 years. What we saw was that the TWorks projects were not completely delivered, and we still have a number of projects that remain that are promises that need to be delivered to the state. So what we wanted to do, because that was such a kind of your once per decade chance to get your transportation need met, we wanted to make that process more flexible. And so for IKE, we have created a rolling approach where projects are selected every 2 years for modernization and expansion. Preservation projects are still selected on the every 2-year cycle, but the modernization and expansion will go into an every 2 year. So we have announced the first IKE pipeline group of projects, and we will continue to do that following local consult every 2 years. Next year will be our next round of local consult, and we will have a new set of projects going into the pipeline. And so what does that, we want to make sure that we're using that pipeline to be responsive to the needs of communities. So if there is a new opportunity or a community has grown quickly for one particular industry, we can more easily fit transportation projects into that pipeline with this approach. So as the legislation came out, we had certain goals that were built into that program. We have to spend 40% of the 50% for modernization and expansion investments in every district. So what we have produced is this minimum modernization and expansion and preservation spending. So this is about a $9.9 billion program. And So this is how those funds are divvied out currently. We will continue to update these numbers, but these are kind of the minimums that are expected or estimated in the 6 districts. And you see the map there of the 6 KDOT districts. And all of this information is also available on our IKE website, because I know I'm kind of clicking through these pretty quickly. The allocations were determined based on different criteria that we utilize. So population, the percentage of roadways that have shoulders for a safety measure, and then freight routes. How much of our freight are we carrying on the routes in the different areas? And we used those to really set the percentage of funding that was going to go to each district. And how the pipeline will work is when we select the projects, we have to develop those. We have to do engineering work, and it takes a few years to get the modernization and expansion projects ready to be let to construction. So when we select the projects every 2 years, we're first putting them in the development pipeline and then selecting for construction and then backfilling that development pipeline with continued projects. So you start to see this rolling process of selecting projects for development, moving them out to construction. When T-Works ended, we didn't have any new projects that were shovel ready. So when we find ourselves in a time like right now, where you have stimulus programs coming out of the federal government, we have not seen an infrastructure stimulus at this point. But if we were to see an infrastructure program, we wouldn't necessarily have projects ready to go because we weren't developing new projects beyond the T-Works pipeline. So we still have those T-Works projects to deliver, and we are working very hard to deliver those projects in the first 2 to 2.5 years of the IKE program. These are the projects that have been selected for the development pipeline. So right now, the blue indicates a modernization project. The green is indicating an IKE expansion project, and the yellow are the delayed T-Works projects that need to be delivered. So those delayed T-Works projects, one phase of those projects have to be let before any new IKE modernization or expansion projects can be let. So right now, our schedule is to have one phase of every one of those T-Works projects let to construction by the end of calendar year 2021. And so how can this, how does your project move from development into construction? We are working to get all of those projects moving and engineering underway, but resources continue to be a challenge to meet the needs of all communities. So we want to partner. And there are 3 things that we've kind of been talking with communities about throughout local council. And one of those is phasing projects. So if you have a major expansion project and there is a way of phasing that project into pieces so that you can meet the biggest need first. An example of that is with the North Junction in Wichita. We worked with that community to identify the key problem location, and maybe we could carve that off and start that project as a smaller project first before the larger project was continued into development. So that is one example. Practical improvements is another example where if we can, and this passing lane example that's on the slide is perfect for that. So if you have a corridor and maybe it has a significant amount of freight, or you're seeing some safety challenges and people are taking risks and trying to pass trucks and maybe putting them in an unsafe situation. If we want to develop passing lanes on that corridor instead of going to a full 4-lane expansion, the passing lanes can be achieved with much less resources than the 4-lane expressway. So if we're trying to get improvement out to address the need today, passing lanes may do the trick instead of 4-lane expressway. And we saw really great results On this example in Southeast Kansas on US 400, we saw reduction in crashes, 32% reduction in the crash rate overall. And it has been a great success for achieving the benefit without having to wait for $120 million to be available, when 15 million investment could make a huge difference for that region. And then of course, community partnership. If communities, especially when you think of, an interchange project that maybe will open up an area for a community to develop. If that community can bring some money to the table, we can potentially get that project into the pipeline sooner for construction, because we're not having to contribute as much state dollars to that. So we are ready to partner with communities in approaching all of these options to try and get their transportation priorities moving. We are also utilizing a program manager consultant in this program. We've seen huge drops in our ability to recruit and retain staff. We lost a number of people over the last several years. And so by bringing in a program manager consultant, they are backfilling jobs that we cannot fill, and also kind of developing a pipeline for that talent for KDOT for the future. We want to efficiently deliver this program, and that program manager consultant, also called a PMC, is a way that we can be very efficient in delivering those projects and developing talent for KDOT. I would be remiss if I did not mention the modal investment under this program as well. We have our aviation program, our transit program. We're starting a state investment in bike ped. Previously, that was primarily federal investment. And so we're looking at ways that we can invest in pedestrian facilities as well, as we've seen that be a key component for communities in keeping folks living in their community. And then we have rail programs as well. So we are really looking at other areas. One thing that's new, we have a couple things that are new in IKE beyond the bike ped piece. We also have an innovative technology program that we are looking at UAS operations and new transportation technology like wind warning systems for trucks driving on I-70. We also have the broadband program that the Lieutenant Governor mentioned. That is being delivered by Commerce, but the funding for that is being, for that infrastructure is coming out of the Highway Fund. And also a new rail program that is working to help short lines and shippers maintain their infrastructure to keep that freight on the rail system. So that is also a new program. Those modal programs are keeping us competitive and healthy and safe. The rail investment that we put into the system is keeping that freight on rail and off of the highway. And also providing public transit is helping people stay in their communities and keeping individual vehicles off the road as well. And so we understand the importance of those investments. We want, we are here to partner. We have a cost share program, an economic development program that are also cornerstones. They weren't new under the IKE program, but those are other ways that we are partnering with communities to try and meet transportation needs. All right, and I know I'm getting close on time here. We are working on being prepared for any potential stimulus that could come out. And then sort of our final IKE slide here, we can utilize good ideas no matter where they're coming from. Our roadways are really important to connect people, and that is our first primary goal, is to make sure people can get where they need to go safely. And it is a huge asset, our system. Being reliable, it's very important for freight and for our position in the country that we can move goods and people very easily and cheaply. It's going to be even more important that we do that well following COVID. And we really want to make sure that we're positioning our system to work for the future. It's not necessarily just about today's challenges, it's also making sure that we are strong in the future. And President Eisenhower really focused on that when he created the interstate system, and we are proud to follow in that legacy. So with that, I am happy to pause for questions, and additional questions always can be emailed to us at ike@ks.gov.
Thank you, Lindsay. I've enjoyed hearing a little bit more about the IKE program. We've got some questions that have come in. The first one is the project map. Is that project map available on the KDOT website? And is that frequently updated that individuals can access?
Yes, yeah. So we have that current map that I showed on the presentation is available on the website. And if you want a copy emailed to you, you can email that ike@ks.gov. But that is going to be regularly updated as TWorks projects are delivered. There's a whole separate website for TWorks, so you can check on those TWorks projects and see what phase of delivery they are in. As we deliver those, they will come off the map, and delayed projects that are still needing to be delivered will stay on, in addition to any new IKE projects that would be announced following local consult next year.
On that local consult, how can a community or individual be engaged and hear about those upcoming consultation sessions that will be offered?
We have a large stakeholder database that we directly communicate with folks through. So if you want to be added to that list, you can email that IKE email address. Also, we usually put out to communities, and through that stakeholder database, we are networked with a number of organizations and really encourage them to involve their membership in opportunities to attend those local consult meetings. We want to hear from everyone. And even now, and we're with that PMC helping us deliver this program, we're going to have a separate IKE website, and that will really help facilitate some two-way conversation with folks as well. There's a whole bunch of ways to get engaged, and really encourage everyone to do that and let us know, what challenges you're facing in your communities.
Thank you. Lastly, and this comes an inside question, I think, and I don't know that you had a chance to talk too much about it today, but I know that the some of the programs being offered through IKE have a cost share program, but you guys, KDOT has strived to keep that relatively small. So can you talk a little bit about that and what that might mean for some of our local bridges out there?
Absolutely. So we have the cost share program, and that is available for local infrastructure, state infrastructure, kind of anything that a community is interested in doing, whether that's in your own community that connects to the state highway system or not. We really want to help infuse a little bit of state money to get some projects off the ground. And that has been very successful. We are very oversubscribed, even with some additional funding that the legislature put in last fiscal year. There's also the local bridge program. Thank you, Kelsey, for reminding me to mention that. That one is really great as well. And it allows counties and cities to apply through our local projects bureau for local bridge dollars. So if you have a bridge need in your community and you are looking for partnership on those tend to be smaller bridges, usually in that 150,000 or less range. But I would encourage you to reach out to our local projects folks to talk about any bridges that need to be replaced. You can also there's also an incentive built in there that you get additional funding if you're willing to take some of those bridges off the system and maybe create kind of a right-sized infrastructure. If you could get by with a low water crossing instead of a bridge, and are willing to kind of downsize that system to help for long-term maintenance, that is something that we are providing some additional funding to do as well.
Great, thank you very much. I'm sure there were some other questions out there. I know we've taken a couple more, so keep those coming in, and we'll have some wrap-up questions at the end. But right now, we will move on to Trent Armbrust. He is the Director of Strategy for Bioscience Technology with the Kansas Department of Commerce. Trent has served in this role at Commerce for the past year, following 7 years in economic development at the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce. At Commerce, Trent works on building relationships with private and public sector partners as the state seeks to help advance new technologies and support innovative research, create new jobs, and further advance the Kansas leadership across key bioscience sectors. Thank you, Trent, for joining us today.
Thank you, Kelsey, and thank you, Secretary Beam, and all those at the Kansas Department of Agriculture for their efforts to host this event. And again, this is, like Lindsey shared, I look forward to this event every single year and have attended it since its inception and have learned so much. And so really appreciate the opportunity today to discuss the framework for growth. As Secretary Beam said in his opening comments, today is really about looking how the agencies are working together and how we can all partner to advance Kansas agriculture, a critical industry in the state of Kansas. And so I really appreciate those comments. The framework for growth is really the child of the Kansas Economic Development Alliance. They asked for this. It's been 32 years since we had a state economic development plan. The last one was the Redwood-Crider report. And so quickly, we went to the process of starting this last fall with an engagement with McKinsey and Brookings. And they were here through the fall. And during that time, we had stakeholder meetings, regional meetings. Many of you participated in that. And we had over 1,000 participate in that process. They left at the end of December, and we have now went into the legislative session, and then COVID hit, and so we're behind from our original schedule, but we're spending this time now in 2020 refining the plan and identifying specific goals and initiatives. We're going to finalize the plan this fall and get it to the governor, and we will use that to then prioritize and begin to implement some of the initiatives in the framework for growth. This is not a final plan, though. We see this as a constantly evolving plan and one that will change as opportunities present themselves and as different priorities come to light. The data that has been seen many times, we have fallen off in so many ways in Kansas. Specifically, you look at our employment rank and our GDP growth and our average wage rank, all have fallen, and really we need to get back into the game. And as we've said many times, Kansas used to punch above its weight class, and we want to get back to doing that. It was mentioned earlier about the brain drain. This slide shows that brain drain and the exodus of talent leaving Kansas. And if you look on the right-hand side, graduates that live in the state where they graduated, Kansas is only retaining 39% of our graduates. We have a big job to do to slow this brain drain in Kansas. Another area that was highlighted by the consultants was the decline in our innovation and entrepreneurship. Again, we used to rank much higher in all these elements, and now we have fallen to the middle or to the lower part of the states in our performance in this area. So this is another area of opportunity for the entire state across multiple industries, is for us to strengthen our innovation and entrepreneurship programming to help grow our future companies in Kansas. Another area that was highlighted, and this is of 2019, an analysis of our existing positions, and that 44% of the positions in Kansas are susceptible to automation. And you can see by the different industry areas, it's not equivalent, but this is something that is continuing to happen as businesses implement technology. We have to be very cognizant that we need to help retrain our workforce so that as automation comes into the workplace, there are new skills required, and we need to be forward thinking and identifying what are those skills that are needed in the future and start training our workforce today for those skills. So the overall, and I know, and I put draft in the upper hand corner of all the slides, because again, this is a work in progress, but we have 4 pillars: talent, innovation, traded sector industries, and agriculture is a traded sector industry, meaning that the majority of the goods or services are sold outside of the state of Kansas. And then digitalization and broadband. And we've discussed the critical importance of broadband already. Lieutenant Governor's comments, as well as Lindsey's and Mike's is also. So a critical element to have broadband in there. And then supporting that, our 4 pillars are advanced manufacturing. Lindsey just talked about the importance of the IKE program and the support of logistics and distribution, the community development that Lieutenant Governor spoke to with the Office of Rural Prosperity and their tour, and then our economic development toolbox. Now I'm going to go through each one of those and go over some of the specifics. We won't have time today to go into all the details, but just wanted to highlight some of the areas that we're thinking about and developing programs for. Talent, a big piece of this is getting that company or industry-specific training programs that we can stand up very, very quickly. And then you have the industry-recognized credentials, understanding that not every job needs a 2-year or a 4-year degree, or they need to be supplemented by industry-recognized credentials. Internships and apprenticeships, we've heard this over and over, and this has been a big national effort, but we need to do more in the internship and apprenticeship in our support of those programs and support of the industry partners who provide those opportunities for the citizens of Kansas. Military family retention and integration. Lindsey mentioned Fort Riley several times. We have several military installations in the state, each of which hundreds of individuals every month leave the state of Kansas as they separate from service. And it's not only the military individual, it's also their spouse. A lot of talent, a lot of them, if we can provide the opportunity in Kansas, they would choose to stay in Kansas. And then as been mentioned before, the importance of digital skills and remote workers. We recognize this as a real opportunity to grow the talent base in Kansas and provide opportunity for economic inclusion, both urban and rural. Innovation, real quickly, it's the capital, it's the research and development, it's getting that research and development out of our universities, but also out of our corporations. And then the entrepreneurship. Once we have those ideas, how we turn those into businesses. Right now, a lot of our intellectual property is leaving the state of Kansas. And we want to keep that in Kansas, grow those businesses here. And then also, how do we target our recruitment of companies that bring that innovative spirit and culture into Kansas? Trade sectors, as I mentioned, these are sold outside the state of Kansas. The consultants identified these categories of professional services, headquarters, aerospace, and then the agriculture and biosciences. And again, this plan is not to supplant what the Kansas Ag Growth Strategy is, but how do we complement that through our activities, recruiting these businesses, helping our existing businesses grow. And then we also know there's sectors not listed here that are opportunities for growth. And so do a deep dive into that and understand where those sectors are that Kansas has strength that we can leverage into future growth. Again, this category we've already discussed a lot. Very excited about the additional investment through the CARES Act that we'll be making in infrastructure, and we recognize that is not near enough to make the impact that we need to make in Kansas. I really appreciated the Hutchison's op-ed over the weekend about the importance of the broadband investment. Just heard about New York State's $500 million investment in broadband infrastructure. Kansas, we have to do more. This is a critical linchpin to our economic prosperity. And then we also have cybersecurity and coding that goes along with this. We need to develop more of those digital skills and those talents that are working in that space. Advanced manufacturing. This is an area that is not an industry sector by itself, but it supports all industries, including agriculture. And it's how we approach manufacturing. It's the use of data analytics, it's robotics, additive manufacturing, cloud computing. It's connecting the factory floor and the farms to the internet so that there's a constant stream of data and flow back and forth. So advanced manufacturing is all of those tools of Industry 4.0 wrapped together. Tied into that is how do we use the Industry 4.0 tools to stay competitive in that national security and defense contracting space. That is a highly, highly competitive space, but there's opportunity in Kansas for growth. And again, that's across the state of Kansas, that opportunity there. And then you have development centers. How do we develop this technology? How do we scale this technology so we can use it on our farms, in our factories? And we need to have this distributive model of technology development centers. And then also, you always have to go back to the importance of workforce and developing those new skills, specifically those digital skills to participate in advanced manufacturing. Logistics and distribution, we've seen that the site development, the investments that Kansas has made in these areas is paying off. If you look at the amount of warehouse activity and manufacturing activity, all of that has paid off in those key investments. We need to continue to develop that, and we're very excited about the IKE program. Also, we know that our tools don't necessarily match up specifically with some of the distribution needs, and therefore we're looking into specific tools to continue to encourage more distribution and logistics investment in the state of Kansas. And again, those technology centers, how do we develop those robots that are working in the warehouses? That's the future. How do we develop that technology in Kansas instead of just being a consumer of that technology? How do we lead in technology as it applies to logistics and distribution? And then again, workforce. We have to continue to develop our workforce to support these areas. Community development. Lieutenant Governor Rogers commented a lot on this, and therefore I won't spend a lot of time, but we are, the Main Street program, very popular, the housing, the childcare, all of those elements that are so, so critical to keeping our communities vibrant and attractive so that people choose to live and prosper in Kansas. We recognize that as both rural and urban issues. And so we look at that density piece so that we have those walkable downtowns. How do we develop that, again, that community that is that live, work, place community? And we understand the importance of community development and talent development to economic development. Finally, the economic development toolbox. This is one that these tools have been competitive for many, many years, but the economy has changed, the needs have changed, and we have some gaps in our economic development tools in the state of Kansas, specifically gaps in the area as it applies to rural communities and smaller businesses. And so what do we need to do to tweak our existing incentive programs to make them more applicable to businesses of all sizes and in all locations? Do we need to have new tools? We're looking specifically right now at how do we shape some of our tools to support remote workers in Kansas and help match our rural workforce up with those who are searching for rural workers. The rural economic development tools, we've already touched on that. Really critical because we've got those opportunities in rural Kansas for economic growth. We just don't have the right size tools to help some of those opportunities. Export assistance programs. We understand there's a huge international market that's going to continue to grow rapidly. We have to participate in that global economy by exporting, by being a traded sector business encouraging state. And then we have industry-specific programs that we've already talked about. There's some for aviation, again, that distribution logistics side, biosciences. There's a variety of areas there we could go. And then also we have to tell our story better in Kansas. The branding and marketing is really, really important internally to help keep talent here and keep businesses here and have them grow in Kansas, but also how do we tell our story of the opportunity that's taking place in Kansas as external companies and folks that are not in Kansas. How do they decide that they want to come to Kansas? And we need to do a better job of telling our story. And then finally, using a regional approach for many of our economic development activities and developing that regional collaboration, because we know that labor basins determine success, not political boundaries. And so those are all different elements that we're looking at. I know that was extremely quick, so we have time for a Q&A. I just want to finish up. I appreciate this opportunity. There's my email address if you have suggestions or questions, and there's also my cell phone number, so please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. You're muted, Kelsey.
How can we, one of the questions is, how can individuals and companies become engaged with the framework for growth and provide input to you?
Sure, it's been venues like this, and we're doing, for different communities, we're doing individual seminars. So happy to work with any company or individual or community on that. And then also really appreciate that right now we're working with the Kansas Department of Agriculture to engage our rural and agriculture stakeholders across the state.
Great, thank you. What are the 2 top items in your view that Kansas agriculture groups and stakeholders need to develop and support right now to enhance sector profitability?
Wow. I'll let the Department of Agriculture answer that one. Our priorities right now are, it's been no secret, is the broadband is really, really important. But then we know going into COVID, talent was always the #1 issue. And we recognize that talent is going to continue to be an issue, and also that the diversity of moving our talent into the digital age skill sets is where I personally see the big change for Kansas.
All right, thank you. And then sort of following this, the Commerce has seen Commerce seen businesses reshoring during COVID, and is Kansas a competitive landscape for these businesses?
Well, I'll answer that. Yes, we're very competitive in that area, and yes, we're seeing some interest. There was an initial surge about reshoring, and now businesses are really looking at their models on the long term, because this is a big long-term strategic investment. We do know that the wages have risen, specifically in China, and that some of the transportation costs have risen, and therefore we are more competitive than we were years ago when companies chose to offshore production. We're seeing that interest to reshore that production, not only from a cost, but then that supply chain security aspect. And so we are seeing interest, we are having discussions, and we are competitive for that. But that is something that is a long-term strategic effort, and therefore you won't see immediate, but we are positioning ourselves to take advantage of that opportunity.
Thank you. I'm going to swing back. We've got a couple other questions that have kind of come in generally and broadly. One, though, is specifically directed to the Lieutenant Governor. And Ron Wilson with the Huck Boyd Institute, thanks you for your leadership and for mentioning the potential for the rural remote work. Is there one example of importance of broadband along with precision agriculture, telemedicine, education? How can we develop employment opportunities for people who want to work remotely?
Well, I think it's twofold, it's probably severalfold. I don't want to just list it at the 2. When we talked with the folks from Northwest Kansas on the rural and remote, training people to have the skills that they need to be able to work remote. There's 2 or 3 segments of the population that they're working for. What I see as a real benefit of that is oftentimes it will allow a young family to come back. One spouse could work remotely, the other one could be engaged in their family farm operation. So it's that off-farm income that has been so vital to the agricultural world for a long, long time. I think one of the big things is teaching businesses that they can work with employees remotely. And if there is a bright spot of the pandemic, I think, a lot of businesses have had to learn how to work remotely. And I think a lot of companies will continue that. I think they've seen that the productivity of an employee can be just as high working from home if that's what they want to do. And so I'm hopeful that that's something that we can encourage businesses to really seriously consider working remotely at home. So I'm not sure if there's just one thing they can do, excuse me. But I think, between the encouraging businesses and of all sizes, and then having the skills ready, there's several different segments we can address.
Next question I'm going to open up to any of you that want to answer, but broadband has been discussed by each of you today, and as we know, technology continues to change and changes at a fast rate. So as we develop Kansas's infrastructure, how do we ensure that we have the right infrastructure out there and the right support to keep us relevant as the world continues to change?
Well, one thing we did at the state level is to make sure that we didn't designate a certain speed or type of technology. because we do know that it's different. And in some areas, it's going to vary. You know, we have the number that's in the current state law is really, really low. I'm not even sure if you could probably share much emails back and forth on that one. So we've tried to stay away from that. And we want industry and the region to tell us a little bit more. So I think that's partly what we do. And we also want it so that it can be upgraded over time. I think those are the things that will go into the grant project. Those kinds of things that take those kinds of things in consideration will get funded before something else does. We also, the previous administration had done quite a bit of work on a map, and we were very encouraged by that. Of course, once you do a map, it's out of date, but what it showed was there's some big gaps. And, you know, I think for the telephone service, for your cellular phone, they did 187,000 tests and 67% failed. So again, we've got to look at what's going to work for that region. And, you know, precision agriculture is getting to be a bigger and bigger thing with the equipment and things of that nature. And so we've got to take that into consideration too.
And if I could, I have got a couple of examples that I can add from a KDOT perspective as well. One of the things that with our preservation program, we're actually upgrading that a little bit and calling it Preservation Plus, so that we can not only just kind of preserve the surface of the roadways, but also look for safety improvements and technology improvements. And one of the things related to broadband expansion that we're really looking at is how can we make sure that we aren't creating unneeded redundancies that exist within the infrastructure. And so, you know, as we look at what highways, especially the freight priority routes that we have identified, how can we make sure that if we are implementing or putting broadband out there for transportation uses, that we also provide handholds at county roads that could potentially lead into additional communities, really lowering the cost of deployment to that community if there is a branch of that system that already gets you closer, and how that could be utilized and really leverage that state investment to maximize impact for communities as well. And something else in the aviation field, I didn't touch on it too much, but Kansas is one of 10 states that has an integrated pilot program for UAS technology. So as we are looking at infrastructure inspection and precision agriculture uses for that technology, we are also trying to recruit some of those businesses where we're one of the locations that innovation can be tested. We're also looking at how we can bring businesses associated with that innovation to Kansas and really leveraging that capability to bring talent and business to the state. So there's a number of ways that we're looking at how we can leverage that technology. If we have those innovators here, Kelsey, I think that positions us better to make sure that we're keeping up with opportunities that we could particularly leverage here.
Great, thank you. Another question that has come in is, childcare is a vital issue in Western Kansas, and I might add in all of Kansas, I think. But what is being done to provide more childcare in our rural communities? I'll open that up to whoever wants to chime in on that.
Well, I'm not an expert on childcare, but we have a team that we're working with on that. Melissa Rooker and the Children's Cabinet have been doing a lot of work in that regard. And again, if you tune in to one of our upcoming ORP tours, you'll be able to hear her talk about some of those things. You know, last summer they did a big tour around the state as well, collected stories from all 105 counties of what was working, what wasn't working. This year they're doing the same thing with story collection about what are they finding. And we have seen a number of child care centers, some that have closed, some that have been struggling. You know, she makes the comment that the average income or the average hourly wage for our child care is $9.25, and very little health benefits for that. And so it's not an industry that really encourages people to come in. And so we've got to do some things there. The cabinet is working on some particular situations. I know there's some spark money that's going into some child care centers. One of the commerce tax credit programs is also highlighting, I think, Wallace County child care to expand that. I think we have to look at a number of different ways. It's not just a single solution, but it is, and I think we also have to ask businesses to step up. Because one of the things we heard a lot before the pandemic was how hard it was to find employees. And I think we have additional employees in our area, but we're gonna have to find ways to bring them into the workforce. And one of those is making sure that we have adequate childcare.
Question, unless I'm going to give one last chance for anyone to type some questions in, but and maybe this goes to Lieutenant Rogers there again, but what value do you see in the agency partnerships and the public and private partnerships that have been discussed today? I think that was a common thread we've heard, and like to hear your thoughts on partnerships going forward.
Well, as you all know, one of the difficulties with COVID is that it has wrecked our tax structure. We're expecting shortfalls. And even before that, we didn't have unlimited money to do everything that we wanted to do. And I think these partnerships of both public and private, and even on the state local consults where local government and state government are coming together on a project. Many of those also have private industry funding in it as well. Those are just a win-win-win for everybody because one, it allows local input. It's not a one-size-fits-all. The community, the local area, the county, the city, the business can tell us how to make it work. And we're just not throwing money at a situation. So I think it's multiple. We can get a lot farther down the road. And if people have some of their own money in the program, it's a lot more important to them. They'll support it. They'll make sure that it gets done correctly. That skin in the game is really a key point. So I think it's a win-win for all situations.
All right, thank you very much. Secretary Beam, that's all the questions that we have today. I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Lieutenant Governor Lindsey and Trent, for being on the program and with your presentation and responding to questions. This, like other presentations, will be available for those who want to go back and listen to it. So if you want to share this information with people that you run into that didn't get to listen live, there's an opportunity. And if there's follow-up questions, by all means, you can direct those to either the speakers, which I think all of them provided contact information, or the one catch-all is if you go to agriculture.ks.gov, you'll find the summit highlighted in the various sectors, and you can go back and look at the other 17 sector sessions as well. But tomorrow we're going to be joined by Dr. Lee Norman as the Kansas Department of Health and Environment and some other representatives of some Kansas agribusinesses to discuss some of the challenges that they faced in the food supply chain because of the pandemic. Wednesday, we're going to talk about some critical issues in regards to international trade. As was noted, international trade is very vital for Kansas agriculture. So we'll have representatives of the U.S. Grains Council, U.S. Meat Export Federation, and United Sorghum Checkoff. I think those three will give us a really good snapshot of what to look for, opportunities, and maybe some things to focus on international trade. And then we'll conclude with the actual summit on Thursday. And in that situation, we're excited to have Ken Isley, administrator of the USDA Foreign Agricultural Service. He'll be our keynote. At that time, we'll give just the real highlights of our other sectors, webinars that we've had. And then also, we're going to highlight some heroes in agriculture. One of the things the pandemic has caused is for people to step forward in a time of need, and those in the agricultural community are just one of several who stepped forward, and we're going to highlight those and announce them. But thanks for being on the session. We look forward to you joining us again tomorrow.